The night this story begins, a Russian armored group moves forward, thinking it is just another probing attack on a quiet sector of the Ukrainian front. Tanks and APCs roll out under smoke, expecting resistance but trusting that heavy armor and numbers will push them through. What they do not see is that the ground ahead has become a layered killing field, mapped by Ukrainian drones and wired with mines, artillery, and Western-made vehicles waiting in ambush. Within minutes, the old idea that armor leads, infantry follows, collides with a new kind of war where FPV drones, cluster shells, and guided missiles decide who moves and who burns. This report walks through wave after wave of these attacks, shows how whole columns are trapped and broken, and explains why frontline crews now talk about this sector as a graveyard for Russian steel. If you want clear, straight talk on real battles like this and the politics behind them, stay with Military Force, hit like, share this report, and subscribe so you do not miss the next frontline breakdown. The first move on this sector came from a small Russian mechanized scout group driving toward a fixed Ukrainian line. They advanced with a single tank in front and several armored carriers behind, ordered to feel for weak spots without drawing a full battle. The route led along a narrow road beside a tree line, where turning space was limited and visibility was poor on both sides. Crews expected light contact and a fast check of the defenses, so they pushed forward in a tight file instead of spreading out. That confidence lasted only until the front vehicle met the hidden charge buried under the road surface. The explosion lifted the lead tank, ripped open the hull, and sent fire pouring from the turret ring in seconds. The crew had no choice but to abandon the machine, leaving a burning wreck blocking the main path into the sector. Behind it, the first armored carrier slowed, then began an uncertain reverse, while other drivers tried to decide whether to push forward or pull back. This hesitation froze the group in a narrow approach lane, with one destroyed tank in front and a confused line of vehicles behind. Once the column stopped moving in that channel, Ukrainian gunners no longer had to guess where to place their fire. Artillery batteries that had registered this road earlier answered the call and laid down a tight pattern of rounds around the stalled formation. High explosive shells smashed into the tree line and impact points near the vehicles, while fragments tore into tires, tracks, and exposed crews. The mine belt had already done its job by stopping the lead tank, and now the falling steel finished what the buried charges had started. Within a short span, the scout group that was meant to probe the line had lost its fighting strength and its armored spearhead. While wrecks burned on the access road, Ukrainian drone operators were already looking past the smoke plume toward a longer line of armor, moving up from the rear. A reconnaissance drone climbed higher, scanned the supply route feeding this axis, and picked out a larger Russian column stretching back along the same approach. Coordinates and range data went out almost in real time to the nearest artillery unit, which prepared a different type of ammunition for the new strike. Cluster shells were selected because the vehicles were still crowded together and had little room to fan out on the confined road. The first bursts scattered submunitions over the moving column, and one of the forward tanks took a direct hit that forced the drivers behind it to slow and weave. Those early impacts shook the formation before it could form up for a full assault, and they also bought time for Ukrainian armored infantry to reach the threatened sector. Bradley infantry fighting vehicles used that window to roll into position, bringing fresh troops straight to the front edge of the defense. The vehicles dropped off squads who spread along trenches and tree lines, set up anti-armor posts, and linked their radios to the drone teams guiding the guns. Their cannons and machine guns added steady covering fire toward likely approach routes, making it harder for Russian crews to regroup after the cluster strikes. At the same time, Russian commanders made a critical error by sending armored personnel carriers forward to act like improvised mine-clearing tools instead of deploying proper engineering assets. Each carrier that hit a buried charge or drew aimed fire slowed the pace even more, turned into another obstacle on the road, and helped turn this entrance to the sector into a narrow corridor of wrecks that would shape every larger assault that followed. Russian commanders did not stop after the first contact, because they still believed that more armor on more roads could open the line. Columns began to move on several approaches at once, and each group tried to use different tricks to stay alive. Some tank crews drove in a weaving pattern, turning left and right to make aiming harder for Ukrainian gunners and drone operators. Smoke shells created white and gray walls along the advance, and crews hoped that cameras in the sky would lose them in the haze. A few formations managed to cross the first belt of buried charges and push into the last open stretch before the main trenches. That final strip of ground looked like a clear run from the gun cameras, yet in reality, it was the most exposed part of the whole route. Every move there took place under constant surveillance, which meant that the real test of the assault was only starting at that point. Ukraine had built a layered defensive system around this zone, and each layer was designed to catch vehicles that slowed or turned. Mine barriers forced heavy armor to bunch up on narrow tracks, so tanks and infantry carriers could not keep proper distance or speed. Whenever a vehicle stopped to avoid a crater or burned-out hull, it became a perfect mark for guided fire from prepared positions. Anti-tank missile units, including crews with top-attack weapons like Javelin, waited for silhouettes to appear in pre-marked sectors. Artillery teams added timed salvos to hit road junctions and tree lines, while FPV devices hunted for any machine trying to edge around the blocked paths. Under this kind of pressure, some Russian crews abandoned working vehicles just short of the first trench network because they saw no safe way forward. Those scattered hulks and empty machines then turned into extra obstacles that tightened the choke points for every following wave on the same approach. Military observers later estimated that Russia committed elements of up to 2 brigades, with more than 100 armored platforms on this axis. The plan was to use weight and repetition to crush the outer shields, yet losses grew quickly before the attackers even touched the deeper lines. Dozens of tanks and personnel carriers were knocked out or left behind across a relatively short distance, and many never fired effectively at frontline positions. The gap between expectation and outcome came from the way different tools inside the Ukrainian defense worked together, rather than from any single weapon. Buried charges fixed targets in place, cluster shells cut into congested convoys, and small FPV machines finished off damaged hulls that tried to reverse away. Leopard tanks and Bradley vehicles added accurate fire from the flanks and rear, turning the open ground into a near-closed kill zone around the first defensive ring. With that outer barrier already claiming such a high price, the stage was set for even more brutal scenes when fresh assaults tried to force their way through the same deadly corridor. Modern weapons on this front did not work alone, because they were linked into a chain that hit every key vehicle in a Russian assault group one after another. In one major push, a mixed column with a main battle tank, an ammunition carrier based on the MTLB chassis, and several armored personnel carriers moved out across open terrain after its own artillery had shelled Ukrainian lines and laid smoke. From a distance, the scene looked like a classic mechanized drive, yet above the haze, a Ukrainian drone tracked every movement and passed exact locations to missile teams waiting in prepared positions. A Javelin operator received the call, locked onto the warm outline of the leading tank, and sent a top attack round arcing down onto the thinner armor over the turret. The strike blew through the roof, flames shot out, and the crew scrambled out of the wreck and ran toward the nearby ammunition vehicle, hoping it could carry them away from the kill zone. Moments later, a Ukrainian tank firing indirect arc shots under drone guidance put rounds into the MTLB hull, which was packed with shells and propellant charges for the force moving behind. The hit turned that support machine into a fireball. Secondary blasts rolled through the frame, and both the damaged tank and the burning carrier were lost within minutes. That short exchange showed how the first link in the kill chain often aims at the spearhead and its rolling ammo stockpile, because once those pieces are gone, an entire forward group starts to come apart. After the initial missiles and tank rounds did their work, the next set of tools stepped in to exploit the chaos inside the broken formation. Ukrainian gunners shifted to cluster-type artillery, which released many small bomblets over the road and nearby cover, cutting into infantry squads trying to leave their vehicles and find shelter. At the same time, bomb-dropping drones circled overhead and released charges onto stalled armored hulls, aiming for engine decks, open hatches, and any area where repairs or escape were still possible. First-person view strike platforms then flew in at low altitude, guided by operators watching live video, and slammed directly into surviving tanks and carriers that still had power or intact weapons. By hitting ammo carriers, command vehicles, and troop transports in close sequence, this mix of artillery and unmanned systems caused repeated internal blasts that spread fire from one machine to the next. Within a short time window, what had started as an organized drive turned into a line of ruined metal and scattered soldiers, and the assault force no longer had the mass or order needed to reach the main Ukrainian strongpoints. This pattern of layered attacks did not stay limited to open fields, because similar methods were also used when Russian armor tried to push into built-up areas and small villages. One clear example came from fighting around a village where the Azov formation was responsible for holding a narrow approach through farmland and low houses. Russian commanders sent 2 armored personnel carriers ahead of the main body, hoping these vehicles could rush the outskirts, drop troops, and secure a foothold among the buildings. The combination of blocked ground, precise armor fire, and relentless overhead attacks stopped the breakthrough right at the boundary of the community, and the attempt to seize a streethead collapsed before Russian infantry could dig in. Scenes like this at small junctions and crossroads help explain why so many later armored thrusts ran into prepared kill zones, and why each new push had to fight across ground already littered with the remains of earlier defeats. Russian armored attacks on this sector soon fell into a clear and deadly pattern. Assault groups formed with tanks in front and carriers behind, moving down routes already recorded by Ukrainian teams. Some vehicles hit buried charges almost as soon as they left their staging areas, while others rolled deeper into approach lanes until blasts snapped tracks or blew out road wheels. Once a heavy hull stopped in one of these zones, it became a fixed mark for weapons watching from the air and from prepared fire points. Strike drones dove into stalled armor, unmanned craft dropped charges on engine decks, and guns on the ground finished off any target that still showed movement. In many assaults, crews never reached the positions they were supposed to seize, because decisive blows landed well short of the main defensive line, and this repeated pattern shaped every new plan on that axis. The same harsh logic followed units that pushed closer to Ukrainian positions, since traps did not end at the first line of explosives. Some tank commanders tried to drive fast through the danger area to reach firmer ground, but they had to steer past wrecks and craters with almost no room to turn. Armored carriers followed through the same narrow gaps, and a small mistake on the controls could put them onto a fresh row of mines where blasts blocked the track for those behind. Cluster shells and guided rounds then hit those crowded sections of road, and the damage multiplied because steel fragments bounced between hulls packed nose to tail. Several columns were broken apart before they fired a planned volley at frontline troops, and surviving crews had to choose between staying in place or risking escape on routes that looked just as dangerous. Those split-second decisions under fire made the cycle even more brutal, because leaving the danger belt was often as deadly as entering it, and commanders knew each order could cost another group of vehicles. Retreat did not bring safety to many of these units, since the roads behind them were also carefully prepared. When orders came to pull back, drivers tried to reverse or turn around in tight spaces, and confusion spread as smoke, dust, and burning fuel hid the edges of the path. Some carriers backed into belts of buried charges laid to catch second and third waves, while others swung wide into tree lines where more devices and hidden lookouts waited for movement. First-person view platforms hunted vehicles trying to flee, flying low along the same tracks and diving into open hatches, exposed turrets, or thin roof plates. More than once, an APC that seemed to have escaped erupted in flames hundreds of yards down the road after a remote-controlled warhead slammed into it from behind. Step by step, these failures turned the whole approach sector into a metal junkyard, with burned-out hulls scattered across fields, roads, and ditches. And that landscape of wrecks is the backdrop for any serious look at why this style of attack keeps failing. Russian armored assaults on this front keep breaking apart because several deep problems sit inside the way Moscow fights this kind of war. Russian units move heavy columns into range, while Ukrainian cameras already watch the ground from high altitude and low level. Yet there is little sign of a serious effort to blind those sensors. Air defense crews fire at incoming threats, but there is no clear system that clears the air over friendly forces or hunts the remote pilots that guide strike platforms. Engineered troops also appear in short supply, so specialized breach vehicles are rare, and ordinary carriers are pushed into roles they were never designed to fill. On top of that, strict orders to keep driving forward, even when routes are clearly compromised, turn what should be flexible maneuvers into slow pushes through known danger areas. When these habits combine, they turn every attempt at a breakthrough into a test of how much metal and manpower Russia is willing to lose in a single sector. On the other side, Ukraine uses a very different approach, building what looks like a modern version of a layered trap that works step by step on any armored formation that enters it. Mine belts are laid not only to stop vehicles but to channel them toward narrow gaps where they can be held under close observation. Once targets slow down or group together in those lanes, reconnaissance aircraft without pilots send precise coordinates and timing data to artillery and missile crews. Warheads that split into many small submunitions shower congested points. Guided rounds search for isolated hulls, and handheld launchers such as Javelin strike from angles that older armor concepts did not expect. Low-flying FPV platforms and bomb carriers then move in to finish damaged machines, often focusing on ammunition trucks, command posts, or lead transports that hold the structure of the assault together. By letting each tool attack a partly weakened piece of the formation, this network of weapons breaks the assault without needing huge numbers of soldiers in every trench. The result is that large-scale armored pushes, planned under ideas from earlier decades, are colliding with a battlefield shaped by cheap sensors and precise remote weapons. Massed vehicles that once counted on speed and armor now move under constant watch, and every pause can turn them into static marks for a new wave of low-cost attackers. For other countries, from NATO members to states that buy Russian or Western equipment, the lesson is that hardware alone will not save old doctrines when skies are full of small machines carrying explosives. Forces that do not invest in strong, unmanned fleets, smarter engineering units, and thick, low-level air protection risk repeating the same scenes of burned-out hulls along their own routes of advance. War colleges and planning staff will have to treat these actions as early case studies, not as rare accidents. Training grounds may need new drills where officers practice fighting under constant drone contact instead of assuming clear skies. If such changes do not happen, future crews could find themselves driving into plans that the battlefield has already shown to be out of date. What happens on this stretch of ground is therefore more than a local setback, because it poses a hard question for every army that still plans to send long columns of armor into areas where cameras and strike devices never sleep. This battle shows how a full-scale armored push can fall apart when it drives into a field that is already mapped, mined, and watched from above. Russian forces sent in large formations with heavy vehicles and support crews, yet many of those machines never reached the main trench line because they were stopped, fixed in place, and then hit in a planned sequence. Columns that should have broken a corridor instead turned into a long trail of wrecks. And that change from moving force to dead metal is the real story behind this clash. When 2 brigades and more than 100 combat platforms are drawn into the same kind of trap, it stops being an isolated mistake and starts to look like a warning about the whole way this kind of assault is built. The deeper message reaches far beyond one sector of the front, because it speaks to every army that still trusts thick armor and tight formations to push through defended ground. Cheap flying cameras, guided warheads, and buried charges now work together, and that mix cuts into vehicles that older doctrines once treated as almost untouchable. The open question is whether major powers, from Moscow to NATO capitals and Washington, will change their planning fast enough by spreading forces out, adding strong active protection, and putting more money into unmanned fleets and low air defense. If they do not move, future offensives could face the same outcome on other maps, and the idea of the armored spearhead may keep turning into lines of burned hulls on new roads. In coming reports, this channel will look at how Ukrainian units build their FPV and artillery networks, and how Western partners study these lessons to reshape tank tactics, infantry support, and short-range air shields. If you want clear breakdowns like this on real battles, modern weapons, and the politics behind both, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to Military Force so you do not miss the next frontline analysis.